Okay, calm down.
You're how old when you go to Canada?
I'm 13 years old,
Okay.
and then when I'm about 16 or 17 years old, I read this book called, and I'm still ashamed of being Jewish at this point. I mean, um, because what happens when people are traumatized, they actually take on the view of the traumatizer. That's what happens in trauma.
Like with children and abusive parents?
Children of abusive parents believe there's something wrong with them.
Right.
You know. No, my sense that there's something wrong with me is more than just anti-Semitism. It has to do with how stressed my mother was and how terrible, difficult my first year of life was, and a whole lot of other things. But anti-Semitism added to it, you know.
Sure.
And so then I read this book, Exodus. I don't know if you've ever read Exodus.
No, I need to though. By
Leon Uris,
Uris, yeah.
which is basically Zionist propaganda dramatized, and it's these noble Jews against these horrible Arabs, creating the Jewish homeland, recreating the Jewish homeland. He romanticizes the terrorists, whitewashes the Haganah, the Jewish army, completely ignores Palestine's history or Palestinian rights. But me, I was so excited, I was so happy because finally Jews were winning.
Right.
And Jews were powerful, and Jews were good, and Jews were loyal. And it totally excited me and inspired me. And then I read nothing but Jewish history books for a year or two and Zionist history books, and I became a fervent Zionist. I bought it whole lot, hook, line, and sinker. Now, by the way, it's an interesting comment, but it's an anti-Semitic book, Exodus. You know why? Because
No.
Leon Uris could not conceive of Jewish heroes unless they looked like Aryans.
Mm.
So Ari Ben Canaan, the hero of Exodus, is an Aryan-looking Jew who gets a blonde Jewish or non-Jewish woman as a girlfriend.
Oh, wow.
And in his other book, Mile 18, which was his ripoff of a much better book on the Warsaw Ghetto called The Wall. But he wrote Mile 18. Again, the hero is, guess what? An Aryan-looking Jew who passes for a non-Jew, who attracts a blonde shiksa,
Right.
So Uris fundamentally loathed on some level. That's
Sure.
why he has to compensate for it by developing these superhero Jews, because the ordinary Jew, the vulnerable Jew, is not acceptable to him. Any case, I bought it hook, line, and sinker.
Right. And at this point, when you're reading that, obviously you don't know they're whitewashing this, they're ignoring that because you don't know about those things, right?
I know nothing.
And in your head, when you were imagining this, and I haven't read the book, so I should, but is it that there were no people there or there were some people there? How did you envision it?
I didn't think about the people there. I just thought about the Jews going back to their homeland, and
Right.
that we have every right to do that. I didn't think at all about that there was indigenous people there, and the Arabs just showed up as enemies.
Right.
Except those Arabs that collaborated with the Jews, who of course were killed by the other Arabs. And it was just good guy versus bad guy. I did a careful reading of Zionist history, but only from a Zionist point of view.
Right.
That there were Jews who were non-Zionists right from the beginning of the Zionist movement. I didn't know about that, nor did I read their perspective. That came later. So at that time, it really validated my life. It excited me. I joined the Zionist movement. I was going to emigrate to Israel. It was my dream. It was my ideal. And you know what? I have to say, on a certain level, I'm grateful for it because it reconciled me to my Jewishness, and
Mhm.
it made me realize I don't have to be ashamed of being Jewish. So it did that for me. And I can understand the identification that other Jews have with that same ideology.
Right.
And unfortunately, what they don't know is what I found out is that all this happened at the cost of the dignity and the very lives of another people.
And so how do you find that out? What breaks the spell, the kind of Zionist romanticized spell?
It was really ironic. Well, for one, two things. First of all, the Vietnam War, the way the media lied about it for years and denied it. And I started wondering, well, by this time I'm how old? 19, 20, 21. And I started wondering, well, how come the same media that lies about Vietnam supports Israel so much? Something's going on here. So that's the first thing. But what specifically happened even before then is that as a Zionist, um, I was once given the task of preparing a talk on how to counter Arab propaganda on the campuses. So I thought, well, okay, great topic. But if I'm going to present a talk on how to counter Arab propaganda on the campuses, maybe I should find out what the Arab propaganda is.
Right. Useful.
So I started reading. I found out there's a whole other point of view. And I remember, and then I found out that there were Jews who actually said the same things, who had the same critiques all along, right from the beginning. And I remember I was still a Zionist and I still believed in it, but I presented this talk. My task was to present the talk as if I was an Arab.
Wow.
So I did.
And you can pass physically.
Sorry?
You can physically pass.
I could pass,
I
yeah.
mean, we're all cousins and anyway, but yeah.
No, I was dark and I was
Yeah.
dark black hair and
Yeah.
I looked like a Middle Eastern. In fact, I
Yeah.
was constantly being mistaken for Arabs and Indians, you know?
Right.
And so I gave this talk. Zionist friends of mine came up to be enraged afterwards. How can you say these things? I said, look, I'm just doing a job. You told me to present.
Right.
So anyway, that's how it first began. And then the 67 war happened. And I did the research and I knew right away that the whole thing was false. That the narrative that the Arabs had been threatening to destroy Israel and so on and attacked Israel, it was propaganda. It wasn't true. The reality was opposite. I could go on at great length about that. So by 67, I'd woken up and I'd researched it deeply. And I wrote an article for the student newspaper about how, this is actually what happened here. I was kicked out of my parents' home.
What? I didn't know this.
Well, look, my parents being Holocaust survivors, I was betraying the tribe. I was betraying my people. And I became persona non grata in the Jewish community. But,
Wow.
I said to my father, Dad, it was in your house that I learned to love truth. I can't help it if you don't like the truth that I see. My dad, to his credit, despite what he had gone through in forced labor and what his family had gone through, in his 60s or 70s, I should say, joined a group that I helped to found called Jews for a Just Peace.
Wow.
So that's unusual in a man his age.
And at this point, you're in your how old are you when you write this article?
In my 20s, I was 23 years old.
You were living at home? You were in college, but living at home?
I was in college living at home. Then I got kicked out.
Well, how do they tell you? Do you remember?
How did they what?
Tell you, like, how do you remember a fight? Do you remember how they informed you that
No, my father, just get out of this home. Don't come back.
and where'd you go?
Well, I stayed with friends.
Yeah. Talk about the rootless cosmopolitan.
Yeah, the wandering Jew.
Yeah, exactly. Another exodus. Um,
Or you know what? Maybe I'm misremembering. I think I was already living with some friends. So it's not so much I was kicked out of the house. I was barred from the house. That's what
right.
happened.
Like, don't come back here.
Don't come back here.
Right. And so were you in touch with your parent? I mean, did you have a rapprochement? Like, how long was this period of
Well, look, they love me. And
yeah.
it lasted a few weeks.
So the spell begins to break. What was the organization that wanted you to give this talk?
Habanim, the Zionist youth, Habanim, which is a labor Zionist youth movement.
Got it.
And I was the Vancouver leader of Habanim for a year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And your parents, what is their view of Israel?
Well, as I said, they had the typical Holocaust survivor, here's our salvation point of view.
Sure. Right.
My mother's father, who died in Auschwitz, was a friend of Vladimir Jabotinsky. Now, Jabotinsky was the founder of revisionist Zionism, which is the forerunner of today's Likud party. And
Which is right wing for people who don't know. Yeah, it's
yeah,
Netanyahu's party. Yeah.
yeah. And so my grandfather was a fervent Zionist, but he was also a bit of a socialist. Like he kind of combined the two. You know, he had a social conscience, and I truly believe that if he was alive later, he would have seen the reality of it, because he was a humanist. He really was. But my mother, out of loyalty to her dad and to the memory of her parents, could never ever give up this idea of Israel. And her and I would always come to bitter words that would end in silence towards the end of, to the end of her life. There was just a conversation that we just couldn't really have for all the love between us. My father, as I say, came around.